Hello and welcome to The Week That Really Was with John McGurk and Sarah Ryan for this week ending the 17th of January 2025. It's the last weekend of the Joe Biden era. We're going to talk a little bit about that. It's the last weekend of the Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Green Party era. We're going to talk a little bit about that. There's been lots of other things happening in the world as well, and we'll get to some of those. But first of all, Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm good. I didn't know what you were going to say. The llast weekend of what? I was like, couldn't be the last week in January. What's he talking about? Last weekend of the Biden era. Happy days. I'm happy. Are you happy?
Oh yeah, I'll miss the old codger, to be honest with you. I'm kidding. I won't really miss him, but like I don't feel any particular animus towards him. I think he's just a doddery old fella who's going off to a well-deserved retirement. And I find some of this stuff on the right where they're kind of like, oh, hey, Joe Biden. I mean, I'm not sure Joe Biden was actually running the US for the last 4 years, to be honest. I think maybe you should focus some of that attention on Mrs. Biden, who might have been doing most of the functions of the presidency in the absence of her husband's cognitive integrity. But we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to an extent that it's not, he's just an old man, fine, whatever. He's not personally offensive in many ways, but it's what he represents and an era that he represents and, a time where it felt like there was no end in sight to the lack of common sense and, lunacy. So I'm happy that he's leaving for that reason.
Well, we'll get back to that and we'll talk about it in more detail in a few minutes. But I wanted to start the podcast with something unrelated to the intro, actually, which is a breaking story that's been breaking this evening. We obviously, as regular listeners and viewers know, we report this on Thursday evenings. It goes out on Fridays. But on Thursday evening, there's a story breaking in the Irish Times, which is amongst the most disturbing I've read for some time, about apparently the Gardaí having uncovered a major paedophile ring operating in the state, centred on one family, which is quite significant. I'm just going to pull the story up here. So yeah, it's they've taken 20 children into care as part of an investigation into one particular family that they say has been involved in the generational abuse of their own children, including selling those, this is all alleged by the Gardaí, and there are no people named, including selling their own children, the sexual access to them, to adults from outside the family. They say that some children in that family may have been born and raised from birth for the purpose of being abused. There's a quote in the article that says it is one of the most disturbing cases that the Gardaí have ever uncovered and will be one of the biggest scandals in the state this year. And of course, as is mandatory in all of these things, Sarah, they also say that there will be, and this is in classic Irish Times phrasing, significant attention will be paid to the role of the state in state agencies in uncovering or failing to uncover these issues long before now. So we can't talk about it in any detail. We want to flag it. What's your reaction?
I mean, I think that we saw this. We spoke last week about the grooming gangs that are happening in the UK, and I think it would be naive to suggest or to think even for a moment that we don't have problems like that within our state right now, and that these things aren't happening, because they simply are. My initial reaction to that is that, yeah, I'm not surprised. I mean, I think as a country, we need to have a bit more honest conversations and evolve our thinking past the point of, for a long, long time, there was a sort of this isn't 100%, but there was an overemphasis that the majority or the only sexual abuse that happened within the state was carried out by the Catholic Church or, associations with the Catholic Church. But the truth is that for a long, long time, a huge amount of sexual abuse that happens of children and grooming and all of this kind of stuff happens within families. That's just a fact. And, so I'm not surprised.
I'm taken by some of the details in the story. I mean, obviously all alleged, but this is what the Gardaí believe to have happened. I'm taken with how many months of the year did we spend towards the end of last year talking about the Gisèle Pellicot case in France, where the husband obviously had perpetrated a horrendous crime, where he basically advertised his wife, drugged his wife, and let men come in and rape his wife. And yet that, to me, sort of awful as it was, and I'm not taking anything away from it, pales into comparison between what's alleged to have happened here, which is that a family effectively sold sexual access to their own children to outsiders. on a significant scale. So, I mean, I'd be interested to see if that story gets a similar level of attention internationally, whether we would want it as a country to get a similar level of attention internationally, and, how it proceeds.
Well, we will see. But as I said last week, what I will, I'm going to forevermore coin woke's theory of hierarchic victimhood, which is that it will depend on who the perpetrators are, who the victims are, and whether or not it suits an agenda or not. So
that's very disappointingly cynical, sir.
Like the grooming gangs in the UK, I'm sorry, but like if you're not the right kind of victim, or if the person who inflicts the crime upon you is the wrong type of predator, you simply won't feature on the hierarchic scale of victimhood in the same way. So let's wait and see.
I should stress, by the way, that we have no idea anything to do with the identity of the victims or the alleged perpetrators, what social class they're from, or anything like that. So that all remains to be seen. Although I think, unfortunately, you're not entirely incorrect in that will matter an awful lot more than it should, whatever their social class or background ends up being. Right, we'll park that there because we can't really say much more about it. We just did want to acknowledge it because it's a big story that's breaking. And we'll start at home. We'll start with the fact that we finally have, this is the last weekend, it now seems, of Eamon Ryan as Minister for Transport and Roderick O'Gorman as Minister for Children and Building Tents. And the Green Party will be ejected from government next week and replaced by the Healy-Raes, Michael Lowry, and all the lads from down my neck of the woods. What was your reaction to the programme for government, if indeed any?
I think that it's an interesting, for people who are, let's just call ourselves, or I'll call myself, people who have been, gasping for a little bit more or less ideologically driven madness. I think that the formation of this government gives some cause to be optimistic. I think that the government, Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil are intertwined, for the absolute foreseeable future, maybe forever at this point. And I think that not having these lads, these independents, they simply won't allow themselves to be, the whipping boy of the government in the same way as the Greens did. They don't have a unified purpose of, we'll call it, saving the world as the Greens do. And, the point is well made on the podcast before that the Greens have an ideological position. They were quite successful in that regard. That's not me saying I agree with what they did, but they were successful in with regards to driving their own agenda for a small party. And the amount of their seats, you'd have to admit they were successful regardless of your opinions on what they did. I don't think it will be that simple to sort of box off every bad decision and blame this group of independents in the same way. So I think the government, Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael, are going to have to get really serious about what they do, why they do it, and how they do it this term in comparison to last term. So from the point of view of people who think like me or you, I think this causes to be optimistic. But I think we're in for a bumpy ride in terms of how they're going to manage to sort these guys out. We're already this evening, I'm seeing a news report about a row breaking out because the Healy-Raes still wanted to sit on the opposite side of the room, even though they're technically part of the government. Lads, if you can't even agree on where you're going to sit, come on. So I think a bumpy ride, but I think overall I'd be happy enough with this in terms of, one would assume, looking at the programme for government, that there's going to be a little bit less, nonsense and a little bit more, hopefully, work. Not that there wasn't work before, but you get my point.
Yeah, I'll tell you why I am. Optimistic is the wrong word, because optimism implies actual positive feelings of hope. I don't have many of those, but what relatively optimistic as opposed to what it could have been is that this is the first Irish government since the 2007 election. So it's the first Irish government in 17 years that has no formally left-wing component to it. So if you think about it, maybe I'm wrong, maybe it's even earlier, but I think I'm correct. So 1997, Bertie Ahern goes in with the PDs. 2002, Bertie Ahern goes in with the PDs. And then the 2007 election, you get Fianna Fáil and the Greens, followed by Fine Gael and Labour, followed by Fine Gael and Catherine Zapoli-Woney, your favourite person in the whole world, followed by Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and the Greens. And so you've had an ideological left-wing component to every Irish government for the last 17 years. Now, I'm not going to pretend here that Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael are going to morph overnight into kind of like even centrists. I think they are still what they always have been, just two political parties with a sort of centre-left economic approach. But I think on a lot of the bullshit that's characterised the last 17 years, we might just get, I mean, if they're smart, they'll give us at least a 5-year break from it. But like, who knows if they're going to be smart or not. But of course, that isn't the only set of issues. I was actually found myself in agreement, Sarah, with an Irish Times editorial for the first time in however long. I mean, probably for different reasons than they wrote.
17 years as well, probably.
Probably 17 years. When they reacted to it, saying it was a kind of a muddled and shunted together document. And it is. It's basically what happened is a bunch of civil servants in the Department of An Taoiseach actually wrote the thing by just taking the Fianna Fáil manifesto and the Fine Gael manifesto and taking chunks of each. And like, you can tell, no politician wrote this. Go and read this, 48,000 words long, without being flippant. None of them have ever written 48,000 words in their life. Civil service put it together, while the lads in the room, sorted out a few minor things like what the VAT rate would be, split the difference there, or take it out of the programme altogether, we'll fix it up later on, while we sit around discussing who's going to get all the jobs. That's what the negotiations were, let's be absolutely clear. And the result is a document that sort of just assumes that the good times will last forever and we're going to keep spending money and it'll all be grand, lads. That was my impression.
Sounds like a pretty good impression. I mean, pretty accurate impression, I would say. But is that not the way it always goes? I mean, the programme for government is kind of only suits when it suits, if you know what I mean. So when they were pretending that we weren't coming up to a general election, they'd say, there's still things in the programme for government that needed to be sorted out. But apart from that, you don't really hear about the programme for government. It's not really engaged with as a working document throughout the life cycle of the government by any stretch of the imagination. And mostly, as you say, it's just somebody copied and pasted both manifestos into a chat GDP and asked it to come up with some amalgamation of the two. And that's probably it.
That's essentially what happened. Now, I wouldn't underplay it in one respect, which is that there are a couple of things in there that are interesting. So, for example, the aforementioned Healy-Raes, and I'm basically pro Healy-Rae. I think they're a good addition to the country. I think they have good instincts on a lot of issues. I know there are some people who have their issues with the Healy-Raes. I'm not one of them. But they have a long record of criticising increases in the carbon tax. Now, there are increases in the carbon tax in the programme for government. And basically, if something's in the programme for government and you've signed up to it in advance, you got to vote for it. You can't say, I signed up for the programme for government, and then when something that's in the programme for government comes up for a vote, say, actually, I'm voting against that. And I wonder if there are problems like that hidden there, because obviously, if you're, I don't mean in this way to come across as in any way patronising towards the independents, who are all senior politicians with a long record and a long career, but they haven't been in political parties and they haven't been in governments enough maybe to realise that if something's in the programme for government, you can't vote against it when it comes up. And I just wonder whether there won't be a few kind of strops thrown in the first year or two as, votes like that end up being taken by people who never want to vote that way.
You can vote against it in the same way as, a party TD can vote against their party, can vote against the government, but it will cause a major issue.
Yeah, well, my point, I suppose, is more that the government has every right to expect you to vote with them. Voting against it would, if you're Michael Healy-Rae, for example, cost you your junior ministerial job that you've just gotten.
I mean, I think it's going to be like herding cats, but, having come very, very close to getting enough, to not need these guys, is like there's been a lot of giving away of stuff. But anyway, hopefully I think I'm with you. Like, I like the Healy-Raes. I think they're good for Kerry. I think that they deliver for Kerry. That's why they do so well. And I'm sure within the programme for government or within the conversations, the horse trading that's happened offline, there's things for Kerry that are coming that they want, and that's the way they do business. And look, that's the way. That's the way. That's what
the Kerry voters will care about, by the way. If you're somebody who's sitting there thinking that the Healy-Raes vote against the carbon tax, that vote for the carbon tax, that'll be them done. It won't be. Not so long as they just put a new roof on the sports club in,
Rhodes,
Ballyhaig or whatever. Yeah. I wanted to, though, I want to move the conversation on slightly away from the programme for government, but just to illustrate some of the problems in the country. I had an interesting experience this week, because I've often said, Sarah, I don't know if I've said it on this podcast, but like, people don't care about the health service. Don't care. Right? And I experienced that personally this week because on Sunday of this week, I heard the news that we all heard that there's like 750 people on trolleys nationwide. And then on, I think, Tuesday of this week, somebody I know quite well, who's a little bit older, took sick, as you say, and was sent to a hospital in the east of the country, where they subsequently spent 2 days on a trolley and in apparently awful conditions, absolutely awful conditions. Like constant noise, the lights never turned off at night, so you couldn't even sleep. Being in a trolley in a corridor where other people were using bedpans next to you with no dignity, and basically, people having to literally go to the toilet in a corridor with other people around them. All that sort of stuff was happening in the Irish Health Service in a major regional hospital. The person concerned got so upset and sick of it after 2 days that, against medical advice, just checked themselves out of the hospital altogether. Subsequently attempted to get private healthcare and was told that there is not in the eastern half of the country at the moment. Now, I'm repeating what this person was told in case somebody in the health service pipes up and goes, "We have a free bed in Carlow," but was told there isn't a single free hospital bed in the east of the country. Not a single one, public or private. I mean, how is that an acceptable situation in a modern democracy? I mean, it's not. It's a rhetorical question.
It isn't. I mean, it's funny because I think that the health service is a thing that people vote on when they are directly impacted by it. And I think that if you're not, if you're in your 40s and you've got kids or whatever, the chances are, if you're lucky, you don't really have much engagement with the health service. Certainly not A&Es or hospitals or whatever. And a lot of people who are working pay for health insurance, so they use VHI clinics for small medical emergencies or whatever, like stitches or whatever it is that they might need. But I actually think that this was on Gript at the time. But years ago, must be 4 or 5 years ago, I got people who know, and then people who don't know. I got quinsy, which is a complication of tonsillitis, and it can be a very serious medical emergency because it's an abscess that develops on your tonsil. Yeah, and it can develop into meningitis because it's like obviously right there. And I had been in Beaumont briefly before. I went to the GP with quinsy, and he was like, "I think this is developing into a quinsy. You need to go to A&E." And I was like, "Absolutely no way am I going to Beaumont. I'll go home. Maybe if I take the antibiotics, it'll be okay, whatever." And long story short, I got worse and worse and worse. And then my sister, who's a doctor, and my husband lied to me and brought me to Beaumont when they told me they were bringing me to a private hospital because they knew I wouldn't get in the car, because it's so horrifying. And there was no ENT. And basically, not to make a very long story short or too long, the treatment for a quinsy like that is that an abscess is growing in your throat and it's closing your airway. So the treatment is that a surgeon comes down with a scalpel and lances the back of your throat open. And you can imagine what comes out your nose and whatever. And so this was done in a room off the A&E. And then I was handed like a paper bucket for all of that to come. And I was told I would get a bed and I was given IV antibiotics. Like, I'm not saying I was going to die, but you can die from this. Like, it's not a small thing. And it was, I think, like 27 hours later, I was still sitting in the seat in the hallway that I was given this bucket with the same bucket. There was like a guy on a bed on a trolley, handcuffed to the trolley, who kept falling out. There was various people in various mental health crises that shouldn't have been there at all. Absolute chaos. The seat I was sitting on was in front of a linen closet, and every time nurses needed sheets, I had to stand up and let them get the sheets. That's not their fault. It's just the reality of it. And at about hour 27, I cut my losses. I pulled the drip out of my arm and I went home. And a few hours later, the hospital were ringing my house or my mobile and saying, "You have a serious infection. You need antibiotics. You need to come back." And I was just like, I don't care. I'm not coming back there. Like, I remember being traveling in, the middle of nowhere in Asia, and one of my friends got sick, and us being mildly concerned on some island off the coast of Thailand of what the medical service might be like. And it was amazing. And this is just it's embarrassing or whatever. And you know, you don't even need to make, like, there has been deaths as a consequence of young people from things in the last year. Nothing ever changes. You know, the Minister for Health did lose his seat in the last election. You could say that that's something. That's maybe the electorate sending a message, but it is so bad and so horrifying. You know, like, words, you just have to see it to believe it. That's it.
Yeah.
And, you know, older people in particular who pay tax all their life or whatever, like, just, you know, you should be able to have a reasonable expectation of a fair, middling to fair, you know, level of health care in Ireland. And you just don't.
Well, an expectation of dignity. Because as I say, there were people in that hospital corridor who were having to use the bathroom, who had to use bedpans, who had to use them right there with other people around. Like, that's horrible. That's just dehumanizing. I think I've told this story on the podcast before, and if I have and you've heard it, I apologize. And if you haven't, well, I'll tell it again, because I think it's so a few years ago, I woke up in the middle of the night. Well, I wasn't in the middle of the night. No, I went home in the middle of the night, but at some point during the day, I developed chest pains anyway. And I was in my middle 30s at the time. And I figured, you know, I'm no longer at the age where a heart attack is entirely out of the question, not the world's fittest person. So I'll go to the doctor. The doctor said, look, you're at risk for a potential heart thing. And off you go to A&E. Off I went to A&E, checked myself in as, you know, sent up there with chest pains, potential heart issue. That was at about 6 or 7 in the evening. And at 3 o'clock in the morning, no one had seen me. And I went home, I texted my wife and said, look, if I don't wake up, I think I was happier dying in my bed than dying on a plastic chair in University Hospital Limerick. And I remember being there, and like, for the first few hours, it was kind of almost bizarrely entertaining, because it was literally like a war zone out of Baghdad. Like, you'd lads coming in and I think I had the misfortune of being in there on a Friday night. You'd lads coming in, like, the towels wrapped around their heads, and, like, you know, clearly they'd literally been in the wars, you know. And then you'd all the older people who just were being treated like human trash. Like, and I remember thinking that if I am ever dictator of the universe, or at least, you know, elected to supreme power in Ireland, and you asked me how to fix the health service, do you know what the one thing I would do that would make a huge difference would be? Is fix the fucking chairs. Like, if you're going to ask people to sit in those waiting rooms for 20 hours at a time, or sit along corridors for 20 hours at a time, make sure the chairs are comfortable, not that cheap, hard plastic shit that makes you feel like you're in a prison. That's just a small thing. I mean, if you can't fix the other stuff.
But also, there's loads of things. I mean, when I was there in the waiting room, I always remember, so obviously with the Quincy thing, it's a massive infection. So my temperature, I was like tremoring because my temperature was so high, but I felt like I was freezing. And there was a door, and in the waiting area, there was multiple people in the waiting area. So somewhere, I don't know where it is, because obviously I would never be going there, because if you're sick, you're sick. And if you're not sick, or if you are actually sick, you don't go to Starbucks. But somewhere on the campus of Beaumont, there is a Starbucks. And I was sitting beside the door when I first arrived for an hour or two. And the door kept opening. I was freezing, and it was winter, and it was kept opening. And it was people who were there sick coming in. I remember this girl, like, coming in, like, in the hours that I was there, came in at least twice with these, you know, like 500 calorie, you know, like these horrible bullshit coffees that are like cream on the top and like caramel. Ugh. And I was like, I'm not a doctor, but I'm just going to go out on a limb here and say, if you're well enough to be getting up twice to go and get stupid coffees, you shouldn't be here. And it was like nonsense with people going up and coming in and out and whatever. And like, I looked around that waiting room and I was like, you know, I guarantee you that, because I remember that, as I said earlier on, my GP had said to me earlier on that I needed to go to the hospital, and I'd refused. And then later, as the day went on and it became obvious that I needed to go to hospital, when I actually arrived at Beaumont, I was registered as not having a GP referral, because he hadn't sent the GP referral yet, because I had refused to go earlier. Now, it subsequently got sorted out, but I remember getting a letter from Beaumont being like, €100, please, because he didn't have a GP referral. And I was like, over my dead body, am I paying €100 for that crap? But so if you don't have a GP referral, I think the €100 in principle is not a bad idea. But most of those people who were sitting around getting coffees, I tell you, they weren't paying the €100.
The other thing here is, of course, that we live in a country. The only good thing with all this is that we do live in a country full of hypochondriacs. I know several. I know several people who love nothing better than going to the doctor for an alleged complaint. And it's there's like, it always seems to me that when you go into these places, there are a whole bunch of people who are, I mean, I'm not saying there's nothing wrong with them. Maybe they've got gallstones or something we can't see or whatever. Maybe they're in crippling pain with their knees. I don't know what it is. But there's an awful lot of people who spend a lot of time sitting in A&E for, things that are not going to get fixed for them in A&E even after they wait the 11 hours. That's just
things that are not, John, an accident or an emergency. The clue is in the name. It's not it's like I'm there because it is an emergency, or if you're there because you had an accident, that makes sense. But getting a sick note because you have, a cold or what, like, I remember so clearly there was a woman who was sitting there waiting for, and she was explaining to the woman sitting beside her that she was waiting for a note for work to say she had the flu.
Oh dear.
Or like, I don't know how that would work or what was going on there, but I remember being absolutely fuming because I was sitting there waiting. The door was opening. It was like hell. The door was opening and closing. This is before I've even gone in for the second hell. It's like, and I was just like, I don't even want to be here. I fought to not come here. And looking around, I can remember why. Because this place is hell. Mm-hmm. And it's full of, as you say, and it's the same. I'm sorry, but like kids are the same. Like, I've brought my kids to hospital. My kids have been a couple of accidents, and then as babies, a couple of, like high temperature and a very high temperature in a baby under 4 months old. You kind of have to bring them to A&E. Mm-hmm. And but I've been in the emergency waiting room in Temple Street and met people, and like, the way you get chatting to parents. And been like, oh, why are you here or whatever. And I remember distinctly this woman, she was like, oh, we just came back from holidays this morning on the flight. And when we got home, she vomited. And I was like, and then what happened? And then she was like, so I just thought it'd be better to bring her in. And I was like, but what else? Nothing. Brought her to A&E in Temple Street because she vomited. John, if I brought my kids into A&E every time they vomited, I'd have to live there.
You have to put a caravan in the car park, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But like kids vomit, that is absurd. Like absolutely absurd. You brought your child to A&E because they got sick.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've always made the point about, I'm sorry now because I know some of you listening will have these cards and you'll really appreciate them, but the GP visit cards for kids. Mm-hmm. It just means you're taking them, speak of the devil, to the doctor. Mm-hmm. Every time they do anything at all that is is out of the ordinary. So that's an issue. Okay, you might have noticed a flash edit there because one of Sarah's children, when I was speaking about them, decided to come into the room and make demands of his mother. So we decided to spare his blushes. Not that he did anything embarrassing, just that he probably doesn't want to be on the podcast quite yet. And
that's it, John. My kids like you so much that when you talk about them, it kind of manifests them into the room. They sense that you're like, yeah.
So anyway, we will move on and we'll go back to talking about what we said we were going to talk about at the start, which is Joe Biden. Did you watch his farewell address, Sarah?
No, I read some of it, and it seemed kind of, I'm going to say, a little bit bitchy and a little bit bitter. So, it's annoying to lose, and obviously they did not want to lose to Donald Trump, and they're very upset and annoyed that they lost to Donald Trump and all that. But I thought that he was kind of over exaggerating and kind of being a bit dramatic when he was talking about, the forces of, basically Elon Musk and Zuckerberg, and then, just to kind of, there was a generally, I think that for a long time we were we were kind of inundated with this idea that originally from Michelle Obama, that, when they go low, we go high, and that they were somehow kind of superior and never kind of got petty or never did anything, and that was all kind of a Republican thing. And I think that over time we've seen that is just simply not the case.
Why don't you do the thing every time I agree with you? But I do agree with you, but I want to say one thing. I also didn't watch it. So we're talking about something we both didn't watch, but I want to say I did read it. The reason I didn't watch is because I find him unwatchable. I actually get uncomfortable watching Joe Biden speak at this stage. And I'm not making that up. I genuinely do, because he's sitting there, he's squinting into the camera, he's talking in this weird, whisper of emphasis. And then sometimes he shouts. And it's kind of like one, and you can tell, and I mean, this is all out in the open now, but you can tell there's something fundamentally not right with him. And I can say that because I probably watched more Joe Biden speeches over the years than the average Irish person. I remember him when he was in the Senate in the 90s. I remember him when he was running for president in 2008. I remember I've watched a lot of old footage of him from back in the 1980s during the confirmation hearings for Robert Bork and Scalia and all those historic things he took part in. And he is clearly not the same guy. He is clearly lost a significant amount of his cognitive capacity. And sometimes when people do that, they develop something called aphasia, which is an inability to get their words out properly or to say, and he clearly has that. I'm sorry. It's clear as the nose on your face that he has it. So I really struggle to watch him. But I did read it, and what struck me about it was these presidential farewell addresses. And I have a piece on this on Gript today, Friday. So I'm kind of, if you've read that piece, you know what I'm going to say. But I think he was copying Dwight Eisenhower because Eisenhower is the only president I can ever remember. People can dispute this in the comments if they think there's another one that they remember. But it's really the only one of these bye-bye from the Oval Office speeches that anyone remembers, because Eisenhower issued this portentous warning for the future about, the potential that what he called the military-industrial complex will get too much power. And so he actually spent a whole lot of the earlier paragraph of that talking about why we needed to have a massive military and a massive military industry, i.e. we being the US. But he then said we have to warn against the power of the military-industrial complex. And you could tell with Biden, with this kind of phrase he used about an oligarchy of extreme wealth is developing in America, he was trying to write himself into the history books in the same way as here's a portentous warning for the future. And I just thought it didn't land at all. But who knows?
I don't think much that he's done has landed in a while. But I think that there's definitely, if you look at the entire inauguration or whatever, there's a few things. Michelle Obama's not attending now, and no reason given. So read into that what you will. I saw Megyn Kelly earlier on doing a piece about how apparently... so the tradition is that as a kind of a gesture of goodwill, that the outgoing vice president will invite the incoming vice president and their family into the house to whatever the residence of the vice president is. I don't know what it's called, but to do a handover, but in a kind of a nice way, show them where the where the bins go and where the toilet roll is kept or whatever you want. And apparently
the Naval Observatory, by the way, is the name of the house of the vice president.
Okay, thank you. And apparently there's no offer has been forthcoming, but that Usha Vance has reached out to the VP's office and asked for that because they have 3 small children, I understand. And she wanted to kind of get an idea of, how that would work, and has not received any invite from Kamala Harris. And apparently the only kind of concession that's been made is that a staffer will bring them into the house and show them where things are at some point. That was reported by Megyn Kelly. But Michelle Obama's not going to the inauguration. That the speech, it all starts to paint a little bit of a picture of, the fact, I would guess, that the whole when they go low, we go high thing has kind of been abandoned. And turns out the Democrats are just as sore losers as anyone else.
Well, I'm glad you said that last bit, because I was going to have to disagree with you. Because this whole business of Michelle Obama not going to the inauguration and people not showing other people around the White House or the Naval Observatory and all the rest of it. I mean, I do remember that the last time we had a presidential transition, the outgoing president didn't bother his ass attending the inauguration, didn't bother meeting the incoming president, didn't do a transition, all that sort of stuff. So, I mean, it's not that I'm a big believer in turnabout is fair play, and I actually think the traditions before that, I always remember 2 transitions in particular. First of all, the 2 most recent ones that went sort of normally was when first of all, when Trump won the presidency from Obama, and Obama met, people will forget this, invited Trump to the White House within a couple of days. They were all good pals, or publicly put on a show being good pals. There was a full transition. And that is what Obama had inherited from George W. Bush, who had done all of that stuff for him beforehand, and in 2008, as opposed to the infamously bad transition, which was the Clinton transition to Bush, where the Democrats took all the W's off the keyboards. This is a small thing in the White House, causing it thousands and thousands of euro of damage. They took because obviously George W. Bush, so they took all the W's off the keyboards in all the computers in the White House. But
I mean, that's funny, but yeah.
Yeah, it was funny. It was funny. But anyway, I just think, it'll be nice if because I think it's a country, right? You can disagree on politics. It's a country. I think
Yeah.
people watch things like Jimmy Carter's funeral that were on during the week because there's a little bit of everyone, even the most partisan right-wing lunatic. There's a little bit of them that kind of like, if they're American, like seeing Trump and Obama sitting there and talking civilly, because it reminds them that the left-winger they know at work actually is kind of sound. They're not on their own, So I think bringing back that kind of civility is good. I know that makes me a wuss and a Trump derangement syndrome person and all that sort of stuff, but I think it is.
What I will say is that in interviews that I've seen with Melania, she has said that behind the scenes, the handover was not particularly generous when Trump first got elected. So there might have been some good photo calls by the Obamas and they were invited within a couple of days. But I've definitely seen her being interviewed saying that there was not, it was not as easy as it was made out. But regardless, the point is that, yes, it is unclassy and undignified to behave like that after losing. But my issue is, John, is that we heard all about that when it was Trump. We don't hear about it. It's just not reported in the same way. If Melania Trump was refusing to go, we would hear about it. Now, we heard all about Melania and, I mean, obviously neither of them attended, but it's not about whether or not this behavior is dignified. It isn't. But it's about how it's reported and who gets free passes and who doesn't. And if you ask me, if Vice President Pence was not inviting Kamala Harris over, whatever, this was going on, it would be big news. And it's not. And if, Michelle Obama's not going and no reason is being given, and it's just a free pass. It's not about the act itself or the behavior itself. We can all agree it's a bit undignified and not ideal. It's about the way it's reported.
That's fair. But I wasn't going to talk about this, actually, but you've just reminded me of a story that I mentioned in passing during the week, but I didn't talk about it as much as I should because it's not that important, but I think it's interesting. What did you think of Melania Trump getting a $40 million deal for a documentary from Amazon?
I mean, why not?
I thought I confess I don't know what documentaries are valued at. Maybe it's a legitimate price, but I do think that if it had been Jill Biden getting $40 million off Amazon for a documentary series about her life, a lot of people currently staying silent would have been saying that was evidence of money attempting to buy and curry favor with politicians and sort of a form of legalized corruption, which I kind of think it is when the first lady of the incoming president is getting 40 million quid for a behind the scenes documentary from one of the largest companies in that country.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. I mean, I think that the whole lines have been blurred by things like, Harry and Meghan, and I know they're not politicians, but, the kind of inviting of documentary teams into everything that happens, it seems like, has just blurred the lines for so long that we're sort of used to it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know how I feel about that. I have to think.
You'll be watching the inauguration on Monday, isn't it Monday? Monday, the 20th?
20th,
right?
yeah.
I think it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'll be good fun. I suspect he's going to get a big crowd. I think one of the things, and I'll turn from saying something negative about Trump to saying something positive about Trump to show that I'm fair and balanced for the viewers who think that I just hate him. I think that the lead into this presidency has been so much different and so much better organized and so much better managed than the previous one. I think he'll get a good turnout for the inauguration. I don't think we'll have another repeat of the press secretary having to stand at the podium and say it was the biggest crowd in human history, or any of that sort of stuff. And I've been really impressed with the way the administration he's been putting together has come into shape. And obviously we have to talk about whether or not, in your view, he had any influence over the release of the pending release. They haven't been released at the time this goes out, but we're told they will be released. The hostages in Gaza and the ceasefire that's happened there. Do you think that was the Trump effect, or do you think Uncle Joe got it across the line at the last minute?
I think it's definitely the Trump effect. I'm not giving 100% credit to anybody, and I think that there's loads of players, and I wouldn't want to undermine some of the work that's done behind the scenes by people, who broker these kind of deals. But I definitely think that if Trump hadn't gotten elected, there wouldn't have been a kind of a fire underneath some of this. And I think that anybody who's, every time we talk about this, there's always comments saying, but at the end of the day, it's not about sides. It's about the fact that, the hostages being released on both sides. people stopping dying, children stopping dying, whatever. I'm all for that. And I think, and I said, and we talked last week about your predictions for the year, and one of my predictions with Trump was always that, within a very short space of time, maybe not the 48 hours or whatever he said, but within a very short space of time of him becoming president, both these wars will be over. And now, hopefully, we're one down, one to go.
Well, it is a ceasefire. It's not an end to the war, and it is only slated to last 6 weeks. So there's actually no agreement for the ceasefire in Gaza to become permanent. That's something people aren't really talking about. There's sort of an assumption that it will become permanent. Yeah. But it's actually only formally a 6-week ceasefire. It's not an end to the war. And I think there's lots of.
There was a ceasefire. They were in the middle of a ceasefire on the 7th of October. So
yes.
Like ceasefire is only as good as who keeps it up. So all like that was a ceasefire. But look, I think that the brokering deals when it comes to hostages would make it feel like a little bit more of substance than just a kind of an agreement. Hopefully, but look, it remains to be seen. I'd like to be positive. I think everybody wants this to stop.
Right. Let's talk about some lighter stuff. I'm going to pick something from our list of topics which we might potentially discuss. I wrote earlier in the week, and I got in trouble because Laura Perrins wrote an article then disagreeing with me about this question. There's a Swedish study published a couple of weeks ago that shows that men can't hack it, Sarah, when their wives earn more than them. That apparently the figures show that if your wife earns more than you as a man, you are something like 20% more likely to end up divorced or in psychiatric counseling, which is a really measurable.
Psychiatric counseling?
Yeah. Or discussing your inadequacies. And I buy it. I really do. I think there's a lot to this.
Okay, go on. What was your position then? What did Laura Perrins say? Because I know
Laura just did the kind of go girls, and men should be as pathetic. And she made the point that if your wife came home tomorrow and said, look, I'm earning 100 grand more a year, would you be like, no, I don't want that money, off you go? Of course you wouldn't. That was her kind of very logical argument. But my answer to that question is no, of course I wouldn't. But would I feel less adequate, or that I was bringing less to the marriage, or that, would I have psychological issues around being a kept husband? Yes, I would. My wife and I earn roughly parity. So it's not, there's no imbalance either way. I'm not suggesting that there is. But were she to suddenly start out earning me by a factor of, 2 to 1 or something like that, I would definitely start feeling insecure about that. And then, the interesting thing was, somebody came along in the comments of the article, and people always say never read the comments. I try to read the comments as much as possible on stuff we publish on Gript, but there was actually a really good comment, and he said, look, this is because, and this is where I'm going to ask you the question, if you think he's right. He said, females always tend to gravitate towards a man who's suitable for their status, and if they're earning more, they can basically pass out the guy who they've been with and go looking for somebody else. So is that guy having a terrible sexist fantasy about the perfidy of women, or did he have a point?
No, I mean, I think he has a point in the sense that I think some of this would come to timing as well. I mean, I think if I went to Keith tomorrow, and Keith earns more than I do, but if I went to Keith tomorrow and was like, I've suddenly got, he would be delighted and he would not care. He would be happy out. But that's because it's an established relationship. We're married. So it's, we have 3 children. So me earning more money all of a sudden brings more money into our household, has benefits for him or whatever. And he, is successful in his own field, successful in his own right, and is confident in that way. I think what you're what a lot of this would come down to is younger men maybe earlier in their marriages or earlier in their careers who probably, we've spoken before about, there's an entire generation of men who are kind of having a bit of an identity crisis in terms of, who they are, masculinity, the male role model, the Andrew Tate thing, incel, all of that kind of picture. And it's like, if you don't know what your role is anymore, maybe the only thing you're still hanging on to is that potentially you earn a bit more. And if that's taken away from you, it makes you feel a bit insecure. I can see where that would come from. And I don't think that men who are totally fine with being with women who earn more than them are necessarily better guys or, more progressive. I think that I think that it's a hard time to be a man. That's what I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would add some stuff to what you were saying there, because I think there's more to it than that. I mean, I'm only speaking personally here, and maybe if they're guys, you can relate, or maybe you think I'm just weird. But to me, it is that she brings so much to the relationship, right? I'm not talking about my wife specifically, but actually in this case I am. She brings so much to the relationship. She does, an enormous share. Like, I think in a lot of relationships, despite, if I say my best efforts, she'll shoot me, but with the knowledge I'm going to be shot, despite my best efforts, she does a disproportionate amount of work around the house, like I think happens in a lot of relationships, which is a constant source of browse and so on.
Yeah.
And I kind of feel that to compensate that, is my job as a man to bring home the bacon. Man go, man kill mammoth, man bring home food, man cook food.
Yeah.
Like that traditional dynamic, which I think has been drilled into us for centuries. And I also think in human relationship, there is that dynamic where, women in particular go for the guy who is most suitable for them. And there's a reason not very many women traditionally, marry down in terms of income. You might argue that's because they've always been denied the opportunity to earn income as a man. This is a point Laura made. But yeah, I think there's real deep-seated psychological stuff there for a lot of people.
I mean, Jordan Peterson does some interesting work on this subject. And, he says that ultimately, whether women want to admit it or not, when women are picking a mate, they're probably somewhat conscious of the fact that at some point they're going to be taken out of the workforce by virtue of the fact they're going to have children or whatever. And they want to be with people who can still support a family. Well, now I don't think most people kind of have that like full level of kind of clinical thinking about, well, I've met this man and I've fallen madly in love with him, but he is unsuitable because of the following, I don't think it really works like that. But I think that people socialize in circles, go to places, look for mates that are of a certain, and, it doesn't always work out that way, but ultimately people try to meet people within the same kind of, what would like social class, would that be, and that,
social class, income percentile, education, all that sort of stuff.
And that's, social class and education and all is all really what it boils down to. Is a lot of it is boiling down to income. And so I think that I understand why men would feel, more and more insecure about a situation where the thing they thought they did best or the thing they thought they brought to the table, to use your term, is somehow taken away from them. However, what I will point out, John, is that there is, to your point, there is still a list of, supposedly female household chores that you could take on yourself instead of the financial thing. If you felt insecure, like you could just start doing more housework and that would, tip the balance back if you were so inclined.
Stop sucking up to my wife. I know what you're doing. Look, you're of course correct. You are of course correct. But in our house, it's always the argument that, like, I will do that job when it needs to be done, not because it, whenever, I won't repeat it.
Well, I think that's really common, and I think that, like, I'm a person who, I'm married, I have 3 children, I stayed at home for 8 years because that's the kind of that's the decision that Keith and I made about the way we wanted to raise our kids. And that was, that was an option for us. And we're very lucky in that regard that we, didn't have a burden of, if we needed to, that we had to put our kids into crash when we didn't want to. So that's what we chose to do. But I would say for, to agree with Laura to a point that, one of the unspoken things, and maybe it is a bit spoken about more and more and more, is that so I had a body of work. I was the homemaker. I minded the kids. I, did everything at home or whatever. And not one of those jobs has been taken away from me now that I've gone back to work. Like every single one of the things that I did before is still waiting for me when I get home. And so I think that, if I was to earn more than Keith, but I'm just trying to get a dig in again, am I?
You are.
Sorry, you're just not, like, it's the wrong audience for you. You're just not going to get,
I'm sitting there, I'm kind of like, well, Keith's still doing all the jobs he did before he went to work as well. He's.
Yeah, I know. Sorry. So it's still, now we're both working, but I'm still doing 80% of the. But
your position was, your position was that because you were going back to work, he should do more work on top of the work he's already been doing. So,
well, that's what I'm doing. Why is that?
Yeah, I know.
I mean,
I know.
I'm still working, and then I'm doing all that stuff. So why should that not be split? It's not going to be. I look like, you know, I always tell people, and I speak to my female friends. This is why female friendships are so good and so powerful, is because I always say to the girls, and I don't have a friend whose husband isn't the same, that if there was a murder in our house and CSI Miami came in with their forensics, they would find Keith's fingerprints, no fingerprints belonging to Keith, on the dishwasher, the washing machine, the dryer. They find it on the Sky Digital remote, in the fridge, maybe the microwave.
Yeah. Similar thing happens. Similar thing may or may not. Like, I know I'm not confirming or denying anything.
Households across Ireland are all in agreement.
All right, let's wrap up. Now, I want to be clear when I start talking about this that I'm not going to get into the conversation. We've had this before. We've done the whole Lily Phillips Bonnie Blue thing before. I don't want people to think that we're sex-obsessed maniacs in this podcast and we're going to talk about the morality, but I'm not. I want to pose a question, though, because people who are familiar with who these people are will know. I'm not going to get into it. Bonnie Blue beat Lily Phillips this week and cracked her record by having sex with 1,000 men on camera inside 12 hours. And the thing that strikes me, and I write about this in my weekly roundup tomorrow, and I want to put it to you, is, isn't this all Elon Musk's fault?
Why?
Because it strikes me that the proliferation of pornographic material on Twitter specifically is kind of turning these attention-seeking porn actresses into kind of minor celebrities in a way that it wouldn't have been possible for them to do when that remained its own subculture, entirely separate away from the mainstream internet, essentially. You don't think I'm right?
I don't agree with you. I think his fault this is, I think, is a culture that has like porn and that there's just, you know, like lots of things, it's the next level. It's never enough. And we have commodified women, made you know, women's sexuality, and, you know, women having loads of partners, and women can do exactly what men do, and we've hypersexualized, you know, females, and this is the result. And too much porn and Instagram I mean, for a long time, you could, like Elon Musk, for a long time, Twitter or Instagram, you know, you would see like normal girls, and I say normal, but like your average girl putting photos on Instagram that were risque, to say the least. So if the average girl, if Mary from next door, who you grew up with, is putting photos of herself in a suggestive pose in a bikini when she works in a bank, is putting that on Instagram, well, then your Lily Phillips and all have to up the ante and up the ante and up the ante and up the ante. So it's not Elon Musk or Twitter. It's porn and the internet and society and the way people have lost their minds about any kind of sense that having sex with people means anything, lying to girls and telling them that they can just have sex with and relationships like the way men do, etc., etc. It's not one thing. It's culture. It's we've done this to ourselves, and these poor girls. I mean, it's horrifying, but it's all of us. It's everything.
Well, if I was some kind of anti-free speech lunatic in Brussels and I wanted to find a way to shut down Twitter, this is the angle I'd come after them on. I was talking to somebody during the week about parenting, because obviously I'm not a parent, but I'm interested. And I'm interested particularly not necessarily at the age your kids are, but at that more difficult age now where they're between sort of 9 and 15, where they're exposed to an awful lot of the world that you and I would not have been exposed to at that age. And I was like, do they have phones? He said, yeah, they have phones, but they've got every kind of form of parental tracking, and everything is blocked on it. Basically, they just have their social media apps and the internet. And I was like, what social media apps? And he was like, oh yeah, you know, Facebook and Twitter. And I was like, they've got Twitter. You don't know what's on Twitter, mate. And I told him, and now apparently their phones no longer have Twitter, because that stuff is
some kid somewhere is like, that John McGurk ruining my life.
So he's a young lad as well, unfortunately. If it was a girl, it probably wouldn't matter. He was a young lad. So sorry, dude. You don't know who you are, but if you did, you would be annoyed with me. But yeah, it's like I just think whatever about the question of whether pornography should be legal, which is a question where I'm actually on. I don't think you can ban it anyway. But having it on major social media apps, I'm sorry. I think there. I think that's, if it can be there, why can't it just be on RTE at 9:00? Better than what they have on, frankly. But like, I don't really understand the point of allowing it in all these platforms, because I think there is an element of it. I think there's an element of where it's being mainstreamed, and this kind of activity is being mainstreamed. And then you had Lily Phillips, and you had the documentary with Lily Phillips, and you had all that sort of stuff. It's becoming more of a more. And now I see there are various copycat girls in America popping up and saying they're going to do the same or similar things or greater numbers, and eventually somebody's going to have a serious injury suffered to them or commit suicide or something like that. We'll all say it was terrible. That's my.
Well, I mean, we spoke before about Louis Theroux and doing the documentary about after porn and whatever. When he went back years later, there was suicides. There was, like this isn't the biggest lie of this is to pretend that this is something good, but B, without consequence. Lily Phillips is managed by her own mother. Talk about the most toxic mother that ever existed. But to pretend that there won't be consequences in the future for this behavior, be they medical, be they physical, be they mental, I'm sure, or just societal. That she'll fall in love with a guy or whatever. His mother, says, I'm not really that keen on you marrying the girl who had sex with 1,000 men on video. Thanks very much. This kind of stuff. Like, these things have consequences, and pretending that they don't. Look, I don't know, but I think it's a complete oversimplification on your part to think that it's just Twitter. I think it's the perfect storm of multiple things. And Twitter and porn being on these social media websites is one issue. Fine, I don't disagree with you. But it's only working and it's only capturing the imagination because it's against the backdrop of a society that is sick when it comes to its attitude to women, girls, sexual relationship between young people, sex in general, what young people or what people who are having sex should and shouldn't be doing, etc., etc., etc. It only works because it's in that society.
All right. Well, I think we'll leave you there with the last word and wrap things up for another week. I think we've covered a lot this week. So hopefully you agreed with us. Hopefully you weren't like the person last week who called us, I don't know, I don't use the exact words, but it was something to do with us being middle class and out of touch with people because of our class background and all that sort of stuff, which I suppose, obviously, everyone brings their prejudices and their backgrounds to a show like this, right? And we're conscious of it and we try to mitigate for it. But there you go. We welcome the comments anyway. So thanks very much for listening. We'll be back next week. I have been John. She has been Sarah. We've had a cameo appearance from her middle child, who I won't name. And that was great. And we'll be back next week. Thanks a million.
By the way, I love that you knew it was him.
Of course I knew it was him.
It was always
All right,
him.
Listen, we'll see you, folks. Bye-bye.